well. There we go. At least that mic's working, hopefully. Yeah, I've been having technical issues. Hope everybody can hear me now. It looks like you can hear me on the meters. Yeah, it's just been one of those mornings. Let's see, do the cameras all work? Oh, look, the cameras work. That's amazing. Yeah. Anyway, welcome. Glad that you've had the opportunity to join. It must be an important live stream, just thinking of coincidences and so forth. When I was trying to book it this morning, I forgot to last night. I was out having fun, year-end barbecue with the group I'm with and my Bible study group. And so, yeah, you kind of get lost in things. And then I woke up this morning remembering I had to book the live stream. And then, YouTube kept timing out and wouldn't let me book it. It was one of those weird things. Yeah, but anyway, got that done, and then technical difficulties. But hey, here we are. So, see, everything seems to be working. And hopefully the presentation will show up as well. But, yeah, I wanted to talk about it. And maybe here's the subject that we're going to talk about today. If it's going to load, oh my goodness. What's going on? Let's try that again. Oh, for some reason, it's not. Well, just give me a second here. I will do it manually. That's just, once again, difficulties, and I had tried everything earlier, and there we go. So anyway, let's see if it shows up now. Nope, still not. Okay, well, we'll do it manually. So, yeah. Switcher's decided not to work for me. I'm perplexed. Just give me a second here. I apologize. This is all very weird. It's as though the ATM is not... Oh, hello, Art of Travel. I'm just having some technical difficulties. For some reason, my presentation is not showing up. I'm really trying to work on it, trying to get it going. I apologize all over the place. Just let me have a quick check here. Oh, look at that. That's why. Huh. Well, just give me a second here. I think I can figure it out. Just 1 minute. Oh, my. I switched. I bought a new switcher, and I think that might be part of the problem. Yeah, so just give me a second. I apologize so much for this. The problem is it's not being recognized over the network. I don't know why. Oh, now everything is freezing. Oh. Thanks, Kelly, for your patience. It's awesome. Yeah, just, my. Okay, well, that's going. But freezing all of a sudden, it's having difficulties here. I'm just going to unplug the Ethernet from it and plug it back in. Yeah, I like jazz, a little bit of classical. I'm pretty eclectic when it comes to that. I'm gonna. Yeah, OBS is having an issue. Wow, look at this. I've never experienced this much difficulty before. Well, okay, that seems to be working. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go old school and shrink my camera and pop it in to, and just pop the live stream in. I'll move over a bit. Oh, maybe we'll just do it this way. Let's try this. Oh. There we go. And I will just, switch back and forth with the monitors and the software. I apologize for this. This is terrible that this is occurring. But anyway, the show must go on. Almost there. There we go. And now we've just got to get the monitor part. There we go. Laptop. There we go. Anyway, oh, and look, my camera's frozen again. Definitely having difficulties here. But not to worry. I have another option here as well. We'll just go single camera old school. I'm going to disappear for a sec. There we go. Okay. We'll get it figured out yet. I'm sorry, folks. I really apologize for this. Yeah. There we go. Maybe this will work now. There. Anyway. Thanks, Kelly. How about now? There we go. Okay. So, yes, mental note, need to fix things. I'm still frozen? Oh, okay, good. Whew. Okay. Well, anyway. So, couple of I'll start again here. A while ago, I started how should we say a video series, like just a short video on situational awareness. But in looking at some of the incidents and accidents that have been occurring at a high rate in and not just in Canada but worldwide, and you don't have to do much. A quick Google search reveals some serious stuff, and so I thought I'd entitle this "Why Accidents" and look at things from four different aspects: the system, the people involved, the players, the processes, and then of course attitude and culture. Now, uh, all of them work together, and that's the thing. Everything works together with this, and so it's important to understand that when it gets right down to it, everything influences, everything works together, and everything influences each other. So let's just take a quick look at the next point, and of course, there's going to be Q&A afterwards, but a lot of this is how should we say, indicative of a few things. There's a shared responsibility, and part of the problem is that a lot of people don't understand necessarily their responsibilities. I did a video and a live stream on the idea between obligations, responsibilities, and accountability. If you look at it this way, your obligations are what are under a legal or moral or ethical code. And then your responsibility is basically those set of tasks or duties that you live up to that obligation with. And then accountability, if you're to picture it this way, is basically the check marks beside each one of those tasks. It's where's the evidence that you've lived up to your responsibility in meeting those obligations. I hope that, how should we say, that definition makes sense to everyone. And so, looking at that responsibility and those levels of accountability, the C-suite, the executives, they have a certain accountability, and it trickles downwards. They have an accountability to the managers and the workers, but managers and workers have responsibilities and obligations under a lot of times different jurisdictions. And although it may differ back and forth, it really and truthfully isn't that much of a difference between the jurisdictions. It works to the point, if you're to think about it this way, the executives have almost a local parentis relationship with the workers. In other words, they have that ultimate responsibility. But then part of it also lies with the planning, the process to lead to prevention. And I want to touch on that as well, because the question needs to be asked: how much was planned? What was the planning like? And was the safety planning integrated within the process with the notion of prevention, but also the attitude and culture? We live in an environment, and a lot of times people will say, well, things are tougher now than there ever were. And if you've ever done any kind of ancient study or study of medieval times or the ancient world, I do a lot of different Bible studies, so a lot of that dives into the history. And things aren't much different now than they were during the Roman occupation of most of the Middle East and Asia. And so times have always been tough, is what I want to say. However, we should be learning from the mistakes that were made so that we don't prevent them in the future. But what's the attitude and culture, and are we looking at a constant chasing of that almighty dollar? So yeah, and so what I want to do is just stop real quick and just review some of this based on some of what I found, and I'll just drag this into the window here. So here's the headline, first one that hit me this year. Whoops, let's move it over so everybody can see. Let's try this. Nope, that's not going to work. See, when you have set out for your programming to work and it doesn't, oh, it's disturbing. Okay, let's try that. Okay, can everybody see that? Good, I hope so. So here's the big one right here. This person at the Tsutsina Nation, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I really apologize to anyone if I'm not. But 43-year-old man died following a workplace accident, and where I live in Calgary, southwest of Calgary. And paramedics, of course, called to the scene. It was a construction site. So once again, this construction and failing, and it's disturbing. So it's believed the victim had fallen off the structure. Now, that's one case. Let's look at another one here. And this is in the United States. A man killed in a workplace accident while inspecting a possible storm damage. Go away, advertisement, to a facility. But here's the alarming article. He was on the lift's platform when he moved the wheeled machine in reverse without looking down, causing the lift to fall off the edge of the loading dock, and the machine fell. And so there's a lot in there that we could unpack. Like, number one, where was your spotter? Number two, mind not on task, or mind too focused on end result of task versus the process of getting there. And when you're operating a lift on a loading dock, you should always be looking where you're moving in the direction, no matter what. When you're operating a mobile lift, you should always be looking in that direction, not just backing up and hoping for the best, especially when there's that opportunity or chance to fall. And then finally, this one, $150,000 after a workplace accident. But here's the fine. And this is where it trickles down from C-suite down to worker, but trickles up from worker to C-suite. And the company was fined for failing to comply with the duties of an employer at a place of employment, including the provision of any information, instruction, training, and supervision that is necessary to protect the health and safety of workers at work, resulting in the serious injury of a worker. And so that piece comes directly from the legislation. And with that, you have to, yeah, exactly. My thoughts exactly, Kelly. Oh my. With that, we have to understand and start to consider a few things, and understand that there's that internal responsibility system. It has to be top down and bottom up. That everything has to meet in the middle. But beyond that, are companies that are going through this right now, are they creating a desire for workers to work safe, or are they dictating working safe? That's the question. I'm just going to turn off some of my other cameras that I'm not using right now because, well, for goodness sakes, something's not working. But anyway, and so it becomes that question, culture or attitude? And attitude influences culture, but culture also influences attitude. It becomes that chicken and egg thing, or both and. Antimonous, I think it's called. And so companies have to, thanks Kelly, companies have to create an environment where people want to work safe. But also, too, what's the attitude? And when we're thinking, what's the attitude, is there the idea of fitting safety into what we do? Safety should be integrated. It should be woven into the fabric of what we do, whether we're at work, at home, or whatever the case may be, out having fun. If we go for a hike, like when we hear these things of hikers having accidents and needing to be rescued, or skiers, a lot of times that's through mishappenstance, but also from lack of planning and also intention. So we have to wonder, is planning becoming part of our process? Is it being fit into what we do? And so that old adage of fail to plan and plan to fail works back into things. No matter what we're doing, when we're creating projects, when project managers are first going on to a prospective site to create a bid, are they looking at probable hazards? Are they part of the hazard assessment? Because when we are taking on a job or planning a new project or whatever, are we fully understanding hazards, risk, and consequence? And the three are separate. Hazards are that thing, that presence of that entity, that thing, that situation where it can cause that harm being the consequence, and of course that risk of the probability of that occurrence taking place. And so we have to ask ourselves, I see weirdness in my camera on the live stream. Is everybody seeing my presentation? Oh, okay. Well, I just see it seems the live stream is so delayed. But anyway, when it gets right down to it, we have to be understanding. They have to be understanding the hazards, considering the risks, the consequences, and so what happens is organizations, and I have that line, survival of the fittest. Companies, organizations are struggling. Profit margins have become razor thin, and from a lot of things, and whether it be oh, hi, Cindy. Welcome to the live stream. Whether it be from competition, external things like tax burdens. For those of you in the United States, we have something in Canada called a carbon tax that is sometimes extremely onerous to what's going on for organizations. It's added that extra little bit of cost and burden. But so now that survival of the fittest thing, chasing profit equals haste. And I can't tell you, even when I was investigating the very first incident that I investigated some 30 years ago almost, once again, some of the common things is I was in a hurry. I didn't notice it. I wasn't aware. Like these things are very common. But then when you talk to the foremen that are planning the work, yeah, I never considered that. I never looked at that. I was in a hurry to get things going. And so that chasing profit, that becoming part of that haste, and that's an issue. And so what is being woven into the culture and that idea, what happens is it starts at the top and trickles down. And so without even realizing it, a lot of times workers are in that much more of a hurry. Why? Because their bosses are, and their bosses' bosses are, and their bosses' executives are in that equal hurry to achieve that that desired profit, to get things done. And now what happens is when you go on with that, then we have to look at the processes that are involved. And so realistically, they're a multi-tiered process. And there's lots of different terms depending on what jurisdiction you're in and where you are. But realistically, no matter what, hazard and risk assessments are that top part of the tier. But not only being top part of the tier, they're also part of that foundation. They are part of that. They're looking at the hazards associated with all of the tasks that are being performed as part of the duties of every job. So you have job, duty, task. So a job, and we'll put it as a janitor, we'll keep it simple. They have a job as a janitor, a custodian, housekeeper, whichever the title may be. Part of that job might be the duty of cleaning floors, but part of that task might be operating an auto scrubber, vacuuming rugs. These are different tasks. And so these are the hazard and risk assessments that take place for everything. But not only that, when an organization moves into an area, they will also do the same thing. But coupled with those hazards and risk assessments are the need for the administrative controls, not just the engineering controls. A lot of times people will place engineering controls, whether they be barriers, interlocks, whatever the case may be, and think that the job's done. But they forget that important piece of the orientation, training, and competency. And when you start to personalize the hazard and risk involved with the job, the organization, and when you start to personalize it right down to the worker level, then what happens is workers understand that the organization is taking a personal stake in them, and that increases your safety culture. It increases and makes for that better environment where workers have the desire to work safe, not just because they're told to work safe. So rather than dictating, there's creating that environment of desire. And so realistically, the next piece of it, though, is that supervision, monitoring, correction. Because a lot of times there will be a process in place, whatever it is, whether it be manufacturing or an automated process, whatever it is. But a lot of times workers will see what they consider might be efficiencies, but that efficiency might come at an extra risk and might be something that's already considered. And that's why there has to be that constant supervision there to make sure that they aren't doing those things where they may look like a good idea at the time, but they're really not. There's that increased risk. So monitoring the work and then providing that correction to ensure that work is going to continue safely. Or that you might have workers that are developing those bad habits, whether they be ignoring some safety protocols or bypassing safeguards or whatever the case may be. And that has to be corrected. But all in all, part of the problem is safety is a lot of times not being in the workflow. And part of the reason is, and I have to ask this question, feel free to weigh in. Are we still as a generation, and I'm talking beyond me, I'm almost 60, but beyond me, still looking at things as an accident? Well, accidents happen. And then sloughing it off as accidents happen versus treating them like incidents and then examining them and making sure that things are in place to prevent it. So the idea is rather than, oh, accidents happen, this was an incident, let's examine it. Let's not look at placing blame. One of the other problems is with society, and it starts from the moment we're this high, it starts from the moment we're toddlers. The very first thing we're asked when something happens, did you do this? And then with that comes a consequence. And then what happens is that consequence, what we learn, whatever ideas that we formulate as children go up with us into the adult world. So there has to be that break in the chain. It can't be like, let's look at placing blame. Let's look at punitive action. And I'm not saying that punitive action can't happen. Yes, by all means, it can happen. A lot of times there is negligence. We'll talk about that in a bit. But we have to look at when incidents occur, let's learn from them. But let's also place that and weave that into the fabric of our organization. Let's put that in as that we're looking at the workflow. And when the workflow is interrupted because of an incident, it's rather, oh, it's an accident, let's just move on. Or even worse than near miss or close call idea. Whew, dodge that bullet, let's move on. No, let's stop, let's examine the incident, put correction where it's needed to be. Then, because we're supervising those workers that were involved, let's monitor them and make sure that those fixes are going to be permanent. And it's a terrible thing. So looking at the process as a whole, we have formal hazard assessments, which I've just talked about. And that's where we are assessing each job and for the duties, for the tasks and then implementing those controls. But that piece where supervisors, people tasked with overseeing that worker, and here's the other problem, is a lot of times people in that C-suite or directors kind of forget that they also have that responsibility to supervise those underneath them. And whether that's the frontline managers and supervisors, whatever the case may be. And so there's that has to be that supervision that those hazard assessments, the controls that are in place are being fulfilled. One of the issues that occurs is a lot of people forget that both of those things right there that I've just talked about are often legislative responsibilities. In most cases, employers are required to identify all hazards associated with the work at a job site, at a work site, in an organization, whatever the case, and then implement controls that are necessary to achieve that and to achieve safe work. But also beyond that is employers are required to supervise and ensure that supervision is done by competent persons and that work is being carried out safely and if not corrected. But also workers have that responsibility to abide by and comply with whatever the employers put in place, but beyond that, the legislation. So the formal hazard assessment is often legislated, and usually the wording may be different in different jurisdictions, but it's still similar. And then beyond that, and I've got some acronyms, sorry, it just didn't fit on the slide otherwise, sometimes called different things, but site-specific hazard assessments, sometimes referred to as field-level hazard assessments. No matter what, they go back to that first piece where the employer is required to identify the hazards at a work site before work begins. And so this is when you have out-of-scope work, whether it is a brand new work site, a construction site, we're building something new. Or even think a landscaping company sending landscapers, a landscaping crew to a place. Well, if that's the case, then that hazard assessment should have begun with the project manager or the person doing the bidding on the job, understanding some of the hazards. Like it was about 5 years ago, I believe, or maybe even less, a landscaping company, which was a veteran person and a new person, were both working with lifts around power lines. And this wasn't assessed, it wasn't thought of when the project was planned. And there was no site-specific hazard assessment, just offload the lifts, get up and start trimming trees, and then get electrocuted. Very sad, very unfortunate. But so here's the question I have to ask. What if the project manager and the person involved in the bidding had started that hazard assessment process and the hazards been included in the bid process for that? And so you have site-specific hazard assessments, field-level hazard assessments, but they also take place when out-of-scope work is being done, whether it's dispatched to an off-site work area or if the work area is being renovated and normal work is continuing right alongside it. So another way to think of it is you're doing this hazard assessment process for out-of-scope work activities, things that aren't included in the formal hazard assessment. And then alongside that is you have to consider things that are legislated or high-risk hazard assessment. And this, what I'm talking about, is cases where very prescriptive. I just did a video last week regarding the difference between performance and prescriptive based safety legislation. And so just to recap that real quick, performance-based safety legislation is where the legislation is outlined and the goal is basically, here's the goal, use your workflow to achieve the goal. And that's very good. That allows organizations to meet compliance using their own personal workflow and they don't necessarily have to change. However, the other thing to consider with that is what about high risk things? And that's often where prescriptive legislation comes in. And yes, Kelly, you're absolutely right. We need to focus on all levels of workers. And believe you me, I'm going to get to that. I am. This is long about process, but part and parcel, part of a live stream or podcast for those of you that might be listening afterwards. And Kelly's question for people that are just listening, or I guess a rhetorical statement, a question, but she said we need to focus on all levels of workers and what their responsibilities are to avoid problems. Absolutely. But back to the prescriptive, and this is where legislated or high-risk hazard assessments are done, and often it's prescribed in legislation. So for things where the consequence is dire, working at extreme heights, say swing stage scaffolds on a building, doing window maintenance or washing, confined space entry, other levels where multi-level or multi-tiered or multi-component fall protection is included, things like that, blasting, dynamiting, etc. All of these have prescribed hazard assessment processes within them. And so these are legislated. But part of the problem is here, and so we go back to that thing I just mentioned where the worker apparently fell from a height. And so there's a lot of questions there. And hey, no problems. The tribal police are leading the investigation. I just have concerns over that. I always have concerns because I've had ex-police officers who I've worked with or worked for, and they've said, "Okay, Kevin, you take the lead on this investigation because I don't understand it." And so if they're working in conjunction with, say, Alberta OHS, I guess that's great. But I guess we'll find out as time passes by. But then the next thing beyond that is the idea of an informal hazard assessment. Now, realizing one thing is that hazard assessments can move up in their tiers. So, for instance, an informal hazard assessment is basically, and we do them all the time, when we hop in a vehicle and we do the 3-mirror check and then look over our shoulder before we back up. Or even better, let's back up. We hop into a vehicle, put our seatbelt on, start the ignition, then do that, and then back up. So we're applying controls. Or we know that it's going to be busy, so we implement a process, an administrative control, and we back into our parking spot before we shut off our vehicle, knowing that we get into it and we may have issues beforehand. All of those are informal hazard assessment. Informal meaning, a good way to think about it is no form. Okay, so we're not recording anything, and it's no different when we've used a piece of equipment and we've done our pre-use check. We shut it down, we get out, we have a quick coffee break, talk to our friends or whatever, and we do a quick walk around before we get into the equipment and move it again. Another informal hazard assessment. Walking into the shop in the morning, and we've just left it. We did our post checks and everything, and we shut the lights off, exited the shop. We unlock the doors, walk in, turn on the lights. We still do a quick walk around and look around just to make sure that new hazards haven't occurred, like a pipe started leaking in the middle of the night, or as I had one instance evolve or on an issue I had to investigate, where the person walking into the shop turned on the lights, this is going to get scary, and all of a sudden smelled natural gas. And then shut off the lights again and walked out. And so having to realize that neither commercial nor residential electrical equipment is made to be perfectly sealed to avoid spark. And so, but smelling that, he said, whoa, I got to get out of here. And we found out that the building had been invaded by natural gas to about 160% saturation. So just slightly beyond explosive, but as soon as you start making the area safe again, you hit that explosive environment when you're exhausting the fumes. So it was an extremely dangerous area, but those are cases of an informal hazard assessment. You're not recording anything, but you're still looking for danger. Now, I started doing a lot of work either at work, but also with this channel with the idea of situational awareness. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about what things cause us at all levels to start ignoring hazards around us. And so we have a few things. Okay, first one is complacency. And it's pretty simple. We are, hey, everything's safe. Ah, no problem. Because nobody wakes up in the morning, does a big stretch, yawns, and says, "Oh, I'll have an industrial accident today." Oh, hey, thank you, creepy gamer. Um, Nobody wakes up and says, "I'm going to have an industrial accident today." Nobody does. Nobody says, I've just woke up. I feel great. After my first cup of coffee, I'm going to lose an appendage, whether it be a finger, hand, or arm. Nobody does that. But what happens is because we've developed some good, safe routines, we have really awesome technology with things like engineered and multi tiered interlocks, where as soon as you activate it, you're beyond, it's an engineering control. Some good examples of interlocks are like your washing machine. You got to close the lid before it'll start agitating. Or you have to put your foot on the brake before you can engage the gear shift on an automatic transmission. Things like that. Those are interlocks. But between the different safeguards and interlocks, we've become complacent. We're safe. Or we develop a sense of routine. We are, we've do this step, this step, this step, this step, and we've been doing them so many times. And I've heard this time and time again. Well, I've done this so many times and nothing ever happened. Well, if you're to think James Reason's Swiss cheese theory, where blocks or slices of Swiss cheese are set up, and those are barriers to harm. But each one of those barriers has a hole in it, and eventually those holes line up. So we have this routine, and we've just been fortunate and lucky to this point that nothing's happened. Or another thing, and this has happened to me before in the past, and I hate to say it, but it's happened. You've drove that same route to work. We develop routines. That's what we do as human beings. And it's actually a mental safeguard that we build in. We develop routines because it reduces the load on our brain for these mundane tasks, for these things that we've repeated over and over again. It also helps us to reduce our mental anxiety because we have that manageability and control. So we develop these routines as part of mental safeguards. But um, part of the problem is these routines also lead us to a detriment process, like to our detriment. How many of you, quick show your hands, have left for work and it's a path that you've taken, it's a route that you've taken many times, route and routine. And all of a sudden you get either partway to work or all the way to work and you can't quite remember the route. You can't remember how you got there. And it's happened to me quite a few times. And whether it be because something's on your mind or you're busy working out a problem that you're going to be dealing with at work, or you're tired, fatigued, etc., complacency and routine often also are plagued with things like fatigue and distractions, etc. So when we become complacent because we've always been safe, something's always worked, and that routine, like for instance, another thing I found when I've investigated incidents and people haven't done that pre-inspection check with the machine they're working with, and I get told this: it's been running like a top. It's always been working. And you know what? I just checked it off, wrote the date, threw the clipboard behind the seat, and got going. Not realizing that something's leaking or something wasn't working or whatever the case may be. There was a component malfunction somewhere, and that caught them. But part of that was that complacency and routine. Now, the other thing is deceptive appearances. And there's a reason why best practices or industry requirements are, or even manufacturer directions are, that ladders can't be painted because you can paint things new. I sort of pride myself as an artist with drywall mud. Once I had our dog, when we left it alone, chewed all the spindles on the railing. And this is a place, an apartment I was renting, a townhouse I was renting in the city I lived in. And my wife said, "Oh boy, they were going to have to hire a carpenter." I said, no, I think I got this. And literally chewed them. They looked like bones, they were chewed. And some drywall mud and some bit of hardener and sanding and fresh coat of paint, they looked like brand new. So you can do that with a ladder. I've inspected job built ladders that were painted and found that they had broken components, but they had been painted over. So, and it's no problem. It's nothing that a saber saw or sawzall or whatever you want to call them won't fix. and I've taken them out of service and destroyed them just for that reason. So we are plagued by those three things that can interrupt that hazard assessment process. Complacency, we've always been safe, or I've always done it this way and nothing has happened, or you know what, looks safe. Famous last words, looks safe. Yeah, and there's what's that? There's a Reddit page called Hold My Beer, I think, and that's exactly it. So now getting to that idea of situational awareness, and there's three different processes for it. One of them is perceive, comprehend, and act, and that is where we understand what the area, what the environment, what the situation is, and completely understand it, and then act accordingly. The other one is, and these are just mnemonics to help you understand the idea, and I'll explain it a bit more. The other one is what was developed by Special Forces, the Armed Forces in the United States, specifically the Air Force, I believe, and that's called the OODA loop, where you observe, orient, decide, and act. And observe your surroundings, your environment, orient, understand, and point yourself at the hazards so that you can fully understand, then decide what to do, and then act accordingly. And no matter what, they call it the loop because it keeps going. No matter what, every environment you are in, even where I am right now, still has inherent hazards. I have a video light above me that's held on an arm on a stand, and it just has one wing nut. Now, thankfully, the engineering has been good, but every time I adjust it, I tighten it, and then I yank down on it to make sure that it's not going to come crashing down and fracture my skull. Might not be that bad, but it's going to hurt. Now, the last one is something I made up. And by all means, if any one of you wants to steal it, I would just appreciate some credit. But I don't mind, because realistically, when it gets right down to it, I just want people to be safe at work. I want to Google workplace accidents one day and come up with everything that there's nothing happened for the last month, last 6 months, last year. I know I'll be out of work, but I honestly don't care. And so this is your safety. Okay, your safety, Y.O.U.R. And I wanted it so that it becomes personal, yet also easy to remember. So let's look at it. So first one is yield. Yield to your environment. Okay, understand that the environment that you've entered or the environment that you're working in, there are going to be hazards present. But to understand those hazards, lose the distraction. I said in the video I did, Apple's going to hate me. Don't care. Lose the earbuds. If you're working and you're wearing earbuds, that's a bad thing. Okay? Because number one is you're not understanding what is completely around you because you're partially distracted. You may see, but you might not hear. The other thing is, keep in mind, workplace assaults are on the rise. So when you can't hear or notice somebody sneaking up behind you. So lose those distractions. Understand that no matter what, whatever environment you're in, hazards are always present. So the first letter, Y, is yield to your environment. Okay, don't go charging in, but yield to your environment and understand that there are hazards there. And that leads me to the next part, which is observe. You've likely heard the term head down at work. And that's one of the worst things, is always looking for hazards. I can remember when I was what was called a bucker in the logging industry, which is basically I was a power saw operator. Sometimes I fell, I cut the trees down, but a lot of times when I was working on the landing and cutting the trees into pieces to be put onto the trucks. And unfortunately, you have a loader working around you. And back in this day, we did it. It was extremely unsafe. Maybe that's why it led me to this place where I am now. I actually got hit by logs from a loader before. But the loader's picking up trees behind you. Skidders are pulling trees in ahead of you, and you're working in between all of this. So you were constantly looking up and looking around. But the problem is, going back to that first slide, and I'll just, let's go back to it. You become complacent because you're out of a hazardous area. You form routines, and then there's those deceptive habits, those deceptive appearances. So observe and look for the hazards. Get into the habit of looking up and around. Once again, that phone becomes a very bad thing. You can see people like this all the time walking, and I've watched people walk into light posts, doors, railings, guardrails, all sorts of things. So put the phone away. Look for the hazards, scan the environment, but don't ignore events around you. And here's another example. And my kids used to bug me because I always wanted to be seated so that I could see the exits in a restaurant and see all the doors, and have my back to a wall. But I've been in some very sticky situations and seen some very ugly things occur, so that forms that process. But then don't ignore like what might be an argument between a couple off to your right when you're in a restaurant. Or don't ignore when you hear screeching tires. Find a way to get closer off or further away off the road or onto the sidewalk. Um, Understand that events, when they happen around you, aren't something that should be ignored. And a lot of times, what happens, especially in social settings, is people put their head down and they don't want to get involved, whereas they should be looking at what's going on. Whether it be an altercation at work. Like I said, workplace assaults are on the rise, and you hear two people arguing in the background or arguing off to your side. Don't just keep going about your work. Stop and observe. Yield to your surroundings and your environment, and then observe. And then beyond that, understand, process those hazards that are there, and then realize the impact. Yes, you might be able to just go along with your work and keep an eye out on the corner of your eye. But when you start to understand the hazards, then that begins the planning process. When you have yielded, observed, and you understand the hazards in the area, your body, your brain automatically starts to plan. And when you're planning, then you're going to react accordingly. And you have to ask yourself, can I control the hazards? Are there controls that are an option to me? This is part of that informal hazard assessment. So this is expanding on that informal hazard assessment. Can I control the hazards? Or is leaving an option? Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, a lot of places have the right to refuse dangerous work or the right to refuse unsafe work, depending on what the wording. Semantics are fairly close. Dangerous means full of danger, whereas unsafe means there's no safety or no controls. My preference is unsafe work because full of danger is rather speculative, but when you look at unsafe, that means there's no controls. Either way, no matter what, the hazards are uncontrolled, leaving is an option, but you don't want to ignore possible threats or hazards. And so this, just look at it this way. And like I said, feel free to use this. Yield to your environment. Yield to the hazards in your environment. Observe what's going on. Observe for possible hazards. Understand them and understand their impact. And then react accordingly. It happens frequently. And I just want to go back to that. So when we're thinking about reacting to those hazards and working on it properly, informal hazard assessments can lead up into part of your hazard assessment process. If you're entering an area and you know that same hazard is present and it's not something that you've been prepared for, and you're repeatedly having to adopt a control because you've yielded to your surroundings, you've observed, you've understood, and you've reacted, then there has to be a point that has to be entered into your formal hazard assessment process and communicated to all of the workers that are intimately involved with that work. Say, for instance, that you've installed a piece of equipment, and no matter what, you've had to adopt a safe work process in your mind because there's no initial safeguard for it. And So what you need to do is communicate that with the other workers that are there, and it has to be part of the formal hazard assessment as a safe work procedure until you can get some sort of an engineering control adopted. Because remember, we always want to eliminate or substitute first and then engineer a control, have that administrative process, whether it be training or a written document, and then finally PPE. But not only that, if you think about a site-specific hazard assessment or a field level, this is for out-of-scope things. This is done for out-of-scope, but if you're repeating the process on a constant basis, then once again, it should be added to your formal hazard assessment process. So once again, like I said, if we were at all levels, right from the CEO all the way down, to have this process, this situational awareness, yielding to the working environment, observing for hazards, understanding them, and reacting accordingly, here's my question. Would workplace incidents be reduced and not thought of as accidents anymore? Just a question. So now, time for Q&A, and Morale Inside's got two of them. And so he's got how health and safety policy influences decision-making, and he's entered that as his first question. And hey, awesome. I was just discussing this thing with two other groups of people the other day. So it's I have to ask Morale, are you listening into my conversations? It's just fortuitous. It's actually pretty neat. But the idea is when we create policy, what we're doing is we're already making those decisions for the workers and those involved. Like say, for instance, violence in the workplace. If the organization has a policy in which, by the way, in a lot of jurisdictions here in Canada, violence and harassment legislation is both prescriptive and performance. It outlines in broadly a performance. You have to meet that goal of having a violence-free workplace, but it also has some prescriptive things. I digress. But having a policy in place removes the need to make decisions from the workers. And if you're looking at the idea of you have workers that are making decisions where it's not prescribed already by the organization, you have to remember those decisions are made based on a couple of things. One is if there's no standards or policy or procedures in place, then they're going to make it based on their experience. And their experience may not be particular to that unique situation that they're in right now. The next one is if they don't have experience, then they're going to use their best judgment, which could be like a coin toss, right? So policy influences decision. And then when you find workers making too many of those decisions because it's not addressed either in your policy or through procedures that are derived from that policy, then you have to go back to the drawing board and either create new procedures or fix that policy. Morale, did that answer that question if you're still in the chat? Oh, Kelly, you like skating on the edge of a razor blade, don't you? Kelly's asked, how do you report a non-compliant manager? And that's tough. I've had to deal with that lots in the past. First things first, it's always good to address it with the person, and the easiest way to avoid conflict. Okay, so let me start this again. Addressing non-compliance with a manager, a person above you, the easiest way to avoid that conflict with that manager is to simply ask a question. Isn't this supposed to be done this way? Isn't this process supposed to be like this? Don't we have this procedure as part of our working process? Always address it with them first. And what I've done in the past is I've also followed up with an email. Hey, Mr., Mrs. Manager, Ms. Manager, whatever the case may be. Thanks for that opportunity to have this discussion today. I just want to follow up with this. And then Usually what happens, and I've found that there's been a lot of times managers have been contrite and said, yes, I know I'm at fault, and they've changed. However, I've noticed there's some that no, they figure they're beyond reproach. And unfortunately, what I've had to do, and I've been fortunate, only one case that I'll get to in a sec. In most cases, I've been able to address it at that level with the manager. Some cases, I've had to take it to that manager's boss, in which case, then it's sort of formed a bit of conflict, but it's been able to be eased out because I've also asked that manager's boss to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to have any conflict. I want to be able to work. I've brought it to you. I'll leave the rest to you. Now, in the other case, yeah, I kind of got bullied and harassed by a person I brought it to. And I had to bring that person up on a harassment complaint, and they were being investigated, but they ended up getting fired on a separate thing for a separate reason. Now, on that note, usually when a person is being like that and not contrite, no remorse, usually my findings are there's other things in the mix. I hope I answered that question well enough, Kelly. It's a difficult one, and I'm sorry if you're going through it right now. But that's the way I would do it, is I would address it first with the manager, do it by asking questions. And then if you can, follow up with that email, and usually that manager will go, okay, you know what? I've got to behave. If not, you're going to have to report it on the way up, because here's the thought, and here's the thing. How are you going to feel if that manager gets hurt, and hurt to the point where it's permanent disability or worse? Or that manager's actions are going to result in the injury or disability or worse, fatality of another worker. So, and unfortunately, part of my designation requirements, I have to do an ethics course every year, or not every year, every recertification cycle. And that's a question that gets asked lots. Sometimes it's with a manager, or you have to report your friend. And yeah, that's a toughie. It's an absolute toughie. And I feel for those that have to do it. Yeah, exactly, Kelly. That's a good point. Keep your emotional intelligence. So, and Morale was good enough to ask, and yes, keep it. I have a difficult with that, keeping my EQ or EI in check. Absolutely. And Morale Inside asked another question. Just hang on, I got to get a drink. And a very good question. What is the decision-making process in health and safety? Thankfully, in our world, we don't treat it as the rest of the world does with our feelings. We deal with facts. As a commentator I've listened to quite a bit, Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, and that's the truth. We deal with facts. And so our decision process should be derivative. And what I mean by that is the organization should always have robust health and safety policy in place. From that health and safety policy, and I don't and regardless of what you want to do, some organizations want policies for everything. And I find what happens is those policies are intertwined or hierarchical. So you rewrite one and then you have to rewrite all of the others, etc. I just like one health and safety policy and then have procedures and rules off of that. But if you have robust health and safety policy, then you have to have written procedures that are empowered by that policy, indicating what workers are supposed to do and the process. Then beyond that is, what is the safety related data that you're generating saying? Okay, so you want to change a process. You want to change a process because what you're doing is unsafe, and you as the safety professional are going to have to do your research. What does your policy say? Is your policy contradicting what's going on? And a lot of times organizations will do that. They'll put good policy in place, But because of chasing that almighty dollar or the market affordability or just dealing with the competition in the marketplace, they are adopting work processes that are contradictory to their health and safety policy. Sometimes you have to point that out as part of that decision-making process. But you have to look at the data generated as well. And here's what our inspections have revealed. Here's what our incident reports have revealed. Here's what our statistics out of all of those have revealed. And so we have to make a decision. Are we going to eliminate this task altogether? Are we going to change the work process to make it safer because of the risk? And that's where that risk management comes into play. And so no matter what, it should never be addressed with feelings. It should always be addressed with what's our risk? What does the data say? But beyond that, what have we put in place to dictate how we are addressing all of the different complexities in our workplace, all of the different functions? And it is, as Morales put, it's one of the issues that organizations have kind of forgotten. And we tend to deviate from what our policy says. And I like it, an organization I work for right now, a lot of times when a question gets asked, the director, the executive director, our big boss will say, well, what does this manual say? What does our policy say? What does our process say? So she drives that decision back to what's already in place. And that's the process we should be using. Because then once again, back to Morale's first question, is how does policy dictate safety decision making? And I know once again a roundabout way, kind of verbose I am, it's a thing I'm working on, but that's the explanation for that. Now, and please keep the questions coming. A question that got asked, and this is about a video that I'd done a long time ago, and it's going to be part of an announcement here. I did this video, and I did only 2 videos on this, or actually 1 video. I can't recall. It's been that long. Improving your safety culture, and I regret it. I wanted to, and I talked about it in this live stream, how essential a robust and well-functioning and healthy health and safety culture is to the health and safety in a workplace. And so I regret this. I haven't had this, had the opportunity to get this going. And that's why, now, how should I say it? This piece is going to come up to what we're going to talk about now. I'm going to see if I can activate my ATM now. And oh, no, it's still frozen. Never mind. We'll turn it off. I'm going to biggin myself up. It's going to take a little while, so you'll just have to hang tough here. Oh. There we go. Wrong key. Anyway, I'm going to take the month of July off from live streaming. And part of it is so that I can work on this series. And I want to do it twofold. I want to do a shorter video on it as part of the other, speaking of safety, podcast process, but also involve it into longer live streams. So I want to, because I can't stress it enough. If you think about it this way, sorry, if we create an environment where people have the desire to work safely, that takes a lot of burden off of us because they have that desire to work safely. If we create an environment where top down and bottom up have that same end goal, and that is constantly stitching safety into the fabric of the workplace, then realistically, our jobs become a lot easier. And instead of focusing on cleaning up, focusing on dealing with stuff in the aftermath in an effort and scrambling to be proactive, we can constantly be operating in a proactive environment. So that's why, in my mind, the safety culture becomes the most valuable thing that we can do. Yes, by all means, identifying, assessing hazards, and then implementing controls are the absolute foundation of a healthy and safe workplace. However, it's like a house. We can build the strongest foundation, but if nobody is behaving inside the household, no matter what, that you can have the best foundation in the world, it's going to crumble. So the two of them both work together. So I want to develop this process. I also want to develop a better video format so that I can turn them out better. Same quality, but better and maybe a little bit quicker. So I'm going to be doing some videos still in the month of July, but I want to develop this series. And if it takes a bit longer, a week or two into August, so be it. But I'll be posting in the community tab, and I'll be posting video updates to let everybody know, because I've developed a really nice community. And I thank you guys all for joining, you folks. I got corrected yet another day, the other day. I'm supposed to be using folks versus guys. Some people find it offensive, and I apologize. And please keep me in check if I've bothered anybody. But I see the importance of developing that safety culture. So for the person that brought me that question, and hold on, I'm going to look up his name in just a sec. Rob Savage, thanks again, Rob, for bringing that question my way and holding me in check. And so by all means, I want to work on that because I see the importance of it. I'm hoping all of you will tune in and pay attention to the channel. Thank you for the questions that have come in. Thank you for watching the videos. Thank you for subscribing and adding your comments and interacting. I appreciate all of it. Wonderful stream today. And I thank you all for joining. And if is there any more questions? Want to give anybody the opportunity to weigh in if there's more questions or anything like that. Yeah. So if there's no questions, thank you very much. I want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Those of you in Canada that are taking part and participating in the live stream, enjoy Canada Day next week. Those of you from the United States, and thank you, Creepy Gamer. And those of you from the United States that are viewing, I want to wish you a very memorable and enjoyable 4th of July. And from other areas of the world, thank you for joining in, and I want to wish you, until we see each other again, a healthy and happy time. So please do me a favor. Practice that situational awareness, your safety, yield, observe, understand, and react, and lead by example. We're all safety leaders. It doesn't matter where we are in the hierarchy. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be a manager, a supervisor, or even a safety professional. All you've got to do is understand safety and lead by example. Walk the walk, talk the talk. If you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk, and just be safe wherever you are. Provoke safety. Okay? So take care. Thank you once again. And thank you, Kelly. Okay, so take care, everybody. Bye for now.